Hey everyone, so I'm just on my way to do some grocery shopping, but I wanted to share this thought with you quickly and see what you think. So I saw Rhett Shull posted a video the other day about the tube screamer and saying how he's never really found a tube screamer that he bonded with until he found the bass tube screamer, which I believe has a bass and treble knob, so you can really dial in how much of that signature tube screamer mid-range thing that you want, and it's maybe got a bit less mid-range honk, which is kind of the signature part of the tube screamer sound. But then it got me thinking, you're comparing an overdrive pedal to a completely different sound. Now I always think it's part of a recipe, as far as like if you have an amp that is set for quite a scoopy blackface clean tone, that overdrive pedal is going to put that mid-range back when you want to be a bit fatter in the mix. So that's the Stevie Ray Vaughan method, where it was a Fender amp really turned up quite loud, so it was kind of overdriving anyway, and that's also another very key component. If the amp's completely clean and you're putting the mid-range focused overdrive into it, that's so mid-range focused that it actually cuts away the bass and treble like the tube screamer does, especially with the tone control on 0, because it's literally a treble knob. It, you know, effectively does that to the signal, and then as you turn the treble up, I'm doing this backwards so I'm going to try and do it the right way, as you turn the tone up it gets brighter, but there's still this shelving on the bottom end. But then you get some cases where that's exactly what you need. So if you have a big fat rocky rhythm tone, the last thing you want for a solo is more bass. You want that to be more mid-focused. So I'm thinking more, that's an overdrive pedal, and something like the Noble's ODR1, something like the Noble's ODR1 is a lot more amp-esque in terms of it doesn't have quite the same mid-range prominence. It's actually quite scooped in comparison, especially if you set the spectrum knob a certain way, and it's got a lot of bottom end. So that might be one of the occasions where a tube screamer in front of it is actually a great tool to get you heard. So there's been some clips where I've heard players sort of well renowned for using the ODR1, and then the solo tone doesn't really sing in the same way as someone like Bonamassa, who is known for using the tube screamer with the tone all the way off, or certainly very low. So I'm just thinking it's worth understanding what job you're getting that thing to do. So it doesn't have to be a Noble's ODR1, it could be a JTM45 in a box or a Plexi in a box. If you're going after a certain sound and that's your amp in a box overdrive, the ODR1's quite good at sounding like your amp but turned up more, as long as you dial it in the right way. But then you're not playing into a clean amp, which is where you get that problem of the overly nasal tube screamer, because it's not, the amp's not compressing in that same way, so you don't get that big fatness of the amp really working. So then you compare that to a Klon. A Klon has a little bit more bottom end, but the mid focus in the Klon is actually a little bit higher up, more around 1K, and the tube screamer is sort of 700 hertz. So it depends what exact mid voicing you want. But then you get something like the BB preamp, which might be the best of both worlds, because ideally you want, or I'd want anyway, a pedal that you can turn on a clean sound and it gives you a nice sort of clean solo boost. But then over an overdrive sound, that is quite difficult to get the balance right, where it sounds good for a clean solo boost, and then if you use your amp channel pedal, where it's the Nobles or, you know, JHS Charlie Brown I really love, if it's one of those, you then might need a different voiced overdrive. But maybe the BB preamp is a good meet in the middle there, because it is a tube screamer with more gain and with a bass and treble knob. There's even one with a mid contour, I think it's a mid boost knob, but what that means is you can dial that in exactly to work for you, and then hopefully you can get more out of your pedal board. The Electro-Harmonix Crayon is a very good near relative of that pedal as well. So I I think it's about understanding what you're trying to get that pedal to do, and whether you want it to just do one function or whether you want it to do lots of different things. Because there's some pedals that excel at one thing, and that one thing they actually can't be beaten at. So if you're trying to get the Stevie Ray thing, it doesn't sound right unless you're using a Tube Screamer or Tube Screamer derived pedal. You can't get the Stevie Ray thing using the Nobles ODR one. You just can't, because it doesn't have that same character. And likewise, if you're going after that Nashville Tom Bukovac thing, you can't get that using a Tube Screamer or BB preamp, because it doesn't have the same thing as the Nobles ODR one. So rather than thinking of it like this pedal sounds more natural than this, I try and think of it as what's the musical use for that pedal. Because you either want it to sound good on its own or stacked with something else. And then ideally you can use both and have two different flavors and combine them, and then you get your high gain tone. That's my approach to it anyway, whether that's from an amp that's being pushed and then you clean it up with the volume knob, but you need to think about what does this add that's lacking. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. I hope this was a interesting 7 or 8 minute rant about overdrive pedals from my car that probably needs some work doing. But yeah, let me know your thoughts.